The moment I opened the door to my parents' house, I heard Samantha's voice, soft, sweet, the way she always sounded when she was up to no good. I paused in the hallway, instinctively staying out of sight. What I overheard next hit me like a freight train. "How was your date?" my mother asked Samantha casually, as if it were the most normal thing in the world. My heart skipped a beat. "Date?" Samantha hesitated for a moment, then let out a breathy laugh, the kind she used when she thought she was being charming. "It was amazing, but you didn't tell me about the white stuff on my mouth." I didn't notice until I was back in the car. My blood ran cold. White stuff. My fists clenched, but I didn't move, rooted to the spot by the weight of what I was hearing. My mother chuckled nervously, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Next time, be more careful. If John finds out, this whole thing is over. You know he'd lose his mind." I froze. The air seemed to leave the room, my chest tightening with every word. What whole thing? What the hell was going on here? Samantha's response was like a dagger to my chest. "What would I do without you, Mrs. Johnson? Thank you for helping with the pregnancy termination. If your son found out, he'd destroy everything, and probably himself." I stumbled back, struggling to breathe. My vision blurred with rage and disbelief as the pieces fell into place. Samantha, my wife, wasn't just unfaithful. She was unfaithful under my own mother's watchful eye, and they were both conspiring behind my back. I sat frozen in my car for what felt like hours after hearing that conversation. My brain refused to process the cruelty of what I'd just uncovered. Samantha, my wife of 6 years, had been on a date, an affair I was now certain of. But it wasn't just the affair. It was the casual way she spoke about it, the sheer audacity of mentioning the pregnancy termination, and worse, involving my own mother in her treachery. I thought about storming back inside to confront them both right then and there, but something stopped me. Rage is a funny thing. It doesn't just consume you, it strategizes for you. If I burst in now, I'd be met with lies, manipulation, and excuses. Samantha was the master of spinning a story. I'd seen her turn late nights out with her friends into convincing tales about last-minute work emergencies. I knew I needed proof, irrefutable evidence that would leave no room for her smooth talking. I drove home, my hands gripping the wheel so tightly I thought I might snap it. The silence in the car was deafening, broken only by the occasional sound of my own ragged breaths. My mind raced with memories, late nights when she'd claimed to be working overtime, mysterious phone calls she'd always step outside to take, the sudden increase in her trips to the gym even though she never seemed to break a sweat. When I got home, the house was eerily quiet. Samantha was out, of course, probably running errands, as she liked to call it. I headed straight to her laptop, my heart pounding in my chest. She was meticulous about clearing her browsing history, but I'd learned enough over the years to check her emails. And there it was, sitting in her inbox like a ticking time bomb. A message from someone named Jake R. The subject line read, "Last night was incredible red heart." My pulse quickened as I opened it. His words were a sucker punch to my gut, "I can still taste you on my lips. Wish I could have stayed longer, but you know how it is. Maybe next time we don't need to be so careful." My head spun. The room felt like it was closing in on me. I wasn't just imagining things, this was real. Samantha wasn't just having an affair, she was deeply entrenched in it, shamelessly enjoying herself while making me look like a fool. I scrolled through their messages, each one worse than the last. Jake wasn't just some fling, he was a regular part of her life. They had inside jokes, shared photos, even plans to meet up at hotels I'd unknowingly paid for. And then I found the final nail in her coffin, an email confirmation from a clinic. The date was 3 weeks ago. The reason? Pregnancy termination. I felt like I'd been punched in the chest. This wasn't just about betrayal anymore. Samantha had been pregnant, and it wasn't mine. I slammed the laptop shut, my head in my hands, struggling to comprehend how my life had come to this. Just then, I heard the front door open. Samantha's voice echoed through the hallway. "John? You home?" I stood up, my body trembling with a mixture of fury and adrenaline. She walked into the room, her face lighting up in that fake, practiced smile she'd mastered so well. "Hey, babe. Didn't know you were home already." For a moment, I just stared at her, trying to reconcile the woman I thought I knew with the monster I just uncovered. Her hair was perfect, her makeup flawless, her expression one of casual innocence. It was disgusting. "Where were you?" I asked, my voice icy. She tilted her head, playing dumb. "Just running errands." "Why?" "Errands, huh?" I stepped closer, my eyes locked on hers. "Does errands include swapping emails with Jake? Or maybe booking hotels I paid for? Or, I don't know, getting rid of a baby that wasn't even mine?" Her smile faltered for the briefest second, and I saw the panic flash in her eyes. But then, just as quickly, she recovered. "What are you talking about, John?" "Jake?" "What Jake?" "You're being ridiculous." "Don't you dare lie to me, Samantha," I snapped, my voice rising. "I saw the emails. I heard what you told my mother. Don't act like I'm stupid." Her expression hardened, and suddenly, the mask dropped. "Fine," she hissed. "You want the truth?" "Yes, I've been seeing Jake. And yes, I terminated the pregnancy because it wasn't yours. Are you happy now?" "Happy?" I felt my voice crack as I shouted. "You've destroyed everything we built together. You cheated, you lied, and you dragged my own mother into this mess. How could you do this to me?" Samantha crossed her arms, glaring at me with that infuriating smirk. "Oh, please. Don't act like you're some saint, John. You've been boring for years. Maybe if you'd paid more attention to me, I wouldn't have had to look elsewhere." Her words were like gasoline on a fire. "Boring?" I shouted. "I worked my ass off to give you everything you ever wanted. A house, a stable life, a future. And I didn't ask for any of it," she snapped back. "You just assumed that's what I wanted. Maybe if you actually listened to me, we wouldn't be here right now." I was at a loss for words. She wasn't just unapologetic, she was blaming me. The audacity of it was almost laughable. I clenched my fists, forcing myself to stay calm. "You've got one chance to come clean, Samantha. Tell me everything. Every lie, every betrayal, every dirty little secret. Or so help me, I'll make sure you regret ever crossing me." She rolled her eyes, sighing dramatically. "Oh, grow up, John. You're not going to do anything. You're too weak." Weak. That word echoed in my mind as she turned and walked out of the room, leaving me standing there, seething. Weak? She had no idea what was coming next. The audacity. The venom in her voice, the condescension in her tone as she called me weak. It rang in my head long after she disappeared upstairs. Every ounce of trust, love, and respect I had for Samantha was gone. In its place was something darker, something primal. She thought I wouldn't fight back. She thought I was some spineless fool who'd roll over and let her walk all over me. She had no idea what was coming. I sat down at the kitchen table, my mind racing. Confrontation was pointless. Samantha was too arrogant, too manipulative to admit any real wrongdoing. And as for my mother? That betrayal cut even deeper. My own mother, conspiring against me with my wife. What kind of sick joke was this? But this wasn't the time to dwell on the pain. This was the time to act. I needed to hit her where it hurt, to take back control of my life and ensure that Samantha's little fairy tale affair ended in a nightmare. First, I needed leverage, something solid, undeniable, and utterly damning. And I knew exactly where to start. I grabbed my phone and called my best friend, Mark. He was the kind of guy who always had your back, no matter the situation. We'd known each other since high school, and while we hadn't always kept in touch, I knew I could trust him with this. "Mark, it's John," I said, keeping my voice steady. "I need a favor." "John? What's going on? You sound..." "Not over the phone," I interrupted. "Can you meet me at my office in an hour? It's important." He didn't hesitate. "Yeah, of course. I'll be there." I hung up and made my way to my office downtown. It was a small space I used for freelance work, far enough from home that I could think clearly. On the drive there, I started piecing together my plan. If Samantha wanted to play games, then I'd show her just how ruthless I could be. When Mark arrived, I wasted no time filling him in. I told him everything: the affair, the pregnancy, my mother's involvement. He listened without interrupting, his expression growing darker with every word. "Jesus, John," he finally said, leaning back in his chair. I don't even know what to say. Are you sure about all this?" I nodded, pulling up the emails on my phone as proof. His face twisted in disgust as he read through them. "This Jake guy, do you know who he is?" "Not yet," I admitted. "But I'm going to find out. And when I do, I'm going to make sure he regrets ever laying a hand on her." Mark nodded slowly, his jaw clenched. "All right. What do you need from me?" "I need you to help me dig," I said. "Samantha's careful, but no one's perfect. There has to be something we can use: bank statements, phone records, social media. Anything that ties her to Jake and proves what she's been doing." Mark agreed without hesitation, and we got to work. Over the next few days, we uncovered more than I could have imagined. Samantha had been seeing Jake for over a year, meeting him at upscale hotels and sneaking off during work trips. She'd even funneled money from our joint account to pay for their little rendezvous. It was sickening. But the most damning evidence came from Mark, who managed to dig up Jake's social media profile. He was younger, flashier, the kind of guy who oozed arrogance. Every post was a carefully curated display of his wealth, expensive cars, exotic vacations, and of course, photos with Samantha. My blood boiled as I scrolled through the images, each one more incriminating than the last. There was one photo in particular that sealed the deal. It was from a month ago, a selfie of Jake and Samantha at a rooftop bar, her hand resting on his chest as they smiled at the camera. The caption read, "To new beginnings, Red Heart." New beginnings? Not if I had anything to say about it. Armed with this evidence, I was ready for the next phase of my plan. But first, I needed to confront my mother. Her betrayal was personal, and I wasn't about to let it slide. I drove to my parents' house, my stomach churning with a mix of anger and sadness. My father wasn't home; he was away on a fishing trip, blissfully unaware of the chaos unfolding in his family. My mother greeted me at the door with a warm smile, but I saw the flicker of guilt in her eyes. "John, what a surprise. Come in, come in." I stepped inside, my expression cold. "We need to talk." She hesitated, her smile fading. "All right, what's this about?" I didn't bother with pleasantries. "I know about Samantha. And I know you've been helping her." Her face went pale. "John, I don't. Don't lie to me," I snapped. "I heard you, Mom. I heard everything. You've been covering for her, helping her cheat on me, and God knows what else. How could you do this to your own son?" She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. Finally, she sighed, her shoulders slumping. "John, it's not what you think." "Then what is it?" I demanded. "Explain it to me. Make it make sense, because right now, all I see is betrayal." Her voice cracked as she tried to defend herself. "I didn't want you to get hurt. Samantha, she made a mistake, but she loves you." "Loves me?" I laughed bitterly. "She's been screwing another man for over a year, Mom. She's been lying to my face while you've been enabling her. Don't you dare tell me this was about protecting me." She looked away, tears welling in her eyes, but I didn't feel an ounce of sympathy. "You chose her over me," I said, my voice trembling with anger. "You chose to protect her lies instead of standing by your own son. And for that, I will never forgive you." I walked out before she could respond, slamming the door behind me. The pain was unbearable, but I pushed it aside. I had bigger things to focus on now. Samantha and Jake weren't going to know what hit them. I drove home after confronting my mother, my mind ablaze with fury and resolve. She had tried to justify her betrayal, but there was no excuse. Samantha, Jake, my mother, they'd all made their choices. Now, it was my turn. When I walked into the house, Samantha was sitting on the couch, scrolling through her phone as if nothing had happened. Her carefree demeanor, her smug indifference, it was infuriating. I wanted to yell, to confront her again, but that would only give her the upper hand. No, I needed to play this carefully. Let her think she'd won. Let her think I was too weak to fight back. "Hey," she said, glancing up at me. "You've been out a lot lately. Work stuff?" Her tone was casual, but there was an edge of suspicion. She was testing me. Samantha was smart, too smart for her own good, but I wasn't the same naive husband she'd been toying with for years. "Yeah," I replied, forcing a tired smile. "Just catching up on some projects." She nodded, clearly satisfied, and returned to her phone. I watched her for a moment, trying to understand how I'd ever loved someone so cold, so heartless. But there was no time for reflection. I had work to do. That night, I stayed up late, combing through everything Mark and I had uncovered. The emails, the hotel receipts, the photos, each piece of evidence painted a damning picture of Samantha and Jake's affair. But it wasn't enough to confront them, I needed to weaponize this information. First, I contacted a lawyer. Divorce was inevitable, but I wasn't going to let Samantha walk away with a dime more than she deserved. I explained everything, the affair, the financial deceit, the betrayal, and the lawyer assured me we had a strong case. Adultery, especially with documented proof, would work heavily in my favor during the divorce proceedings. But this wasn't just about divorce. I wanted Samantha and Jake to feel the consequences of their actions, to suffer the way I had. That's when I had an idea, a trap so perfect, so ironclad, that neither of them would see it coming. The next day, I called Jake. It wasn't hard to find his number, Samantha had carelessly left it in one of her saved contacts. My heart pounded as the phone rang, but I kept my voice steady when he answered. "Hello?" "Jake," I said, my tone calm but firm. "This is John, Samantha's husband." There was a long pause. I could hear the tension in his silence, the gears turning in his mind as he tried to figure out how to respond. Hey, man," he finally said, his voice hesitant. "Listen, I don't know what." "Save it," I interrupted. "I'm not calling to fight with you. I just want to talk." "Talk about what?" His tone was cautious, but there was a hint of curiosity. "Samantha," I said. "I know about the two of you. I know everything. But this isn't about her, it's about us. I think we can help each other." Another pause. "Help each other? What are you talking about?" "Meet me tomorrow," I said. "No tricks, no drama. Just a conversation. I think you'll find it worth your while." He hesitated, but eventually agreed. I gave him the address of a coffee shop downtown and hung up, a grim smile on my face. The bait was set. The following afternoon, I arrived at the coffee shop early, choosing a table near the back where we wouldn't be overheard. I didn't have to wait long. Jake walked in, scanning the room nervously before spotting me. He was younger than I expected, with a cocky swagger that made me want to punch him on sight. But I kept my composure. "John," he said, sitting down across from me. "So, what's this about?" I leaned forward, fixing him with a cold stare. "It's simple. You've been sleeping with my wife, and I want to know everything. How long it's been going on, where you've met, what she's told you about me. Every detail." He bristled, his arrogance slipping into defensiveness. "Look, man, I don't owe you anything. If you've got a problem, take it up with Samantha." "Oh, I will," I said. "But first, I want to hear your side of the story. Because right now, you're just as guilty as she is. And trust me, if you don't cooperate, I'll make sure you regret it." Jake's jaw tightened. "Is that a threat?" "It's a promise," I said, pulling out my phone. "I've got everything, Jake. The emails, the photos, even the clinic receipts. If you think for a second that I won't use this to ruin you, you're dead wrong." He stared at me, his confidence crumbling. "What do you want?" "I told you," I said. "The truth. Tell me everything, and maybe, just maybe, I won't go straight to your boss, your family, or the police." The mention of the police made him flinch. I didn't have concrete evidence of anything criminal, but he didn't know that. All I needed was to plant the seed of fear. Jake sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. Fine. We've been seeing each other for about a year. She told me you were distant, that you didn't care about her anymore. I believed her. I laughed bitterly. Of course you did. And did she happen to mention that she was siphoning money from our account to pay for your little dates? His eyes widened. What? No. I had no idea. Right, I said, leaning back in my chair. You've been her little puppet, Jake. And now, you're going to help me cut the strings. What do you mean? He asked, his voice shaky. You'll see, I said, standing up. But for now, stay away from her. If I find out you've been in contact, you'll regret it. I left him sitting there, pale and shaken. The first piece of my plan was in place, but there was still more to do. Samantha had no idea what was coming, and that was exactly how I wanted it. By the time I got home from my meeting with Jake, I felt like the pieces were starting to fall into place. Jake was a fool, a pawn who'd let himself be seduced into Samantha's twisted game. But now, I had him exactly where I wanted him, scared, compliant, and ready to spill more if necessary. It was time to move on to the real problem, Samantha. When I walked through the front door, she was in the kitchen, humming a tune as she stirred something on the stove. The image was nauseating. She looked so normal, so domestic, like the perfect wife she pretended to be. If only the neighbors could see her for what she really was. Hey, you're back, she said with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. I made pasta for dinner. Your favorite. I didn't respond. I just nodded, my mind elsewhere. Tonight wasn't the night for a confrontation, not yet. I needed to give her enough rope to hang herself, to keep playing the role of the innocent wife while I set my trap. Over dinner, I forced myself to act normal, even throwing in a few compliments about the food. She seemed relieved, probably thinking I'd bought into her act. The audacity of her confidence was almost amusing. But as much as I wanted to expose her right then and there, I knew patience was key. The next day, I went to the lawyer's office with all the evidence I'd gathered. Photos, emails, financial records, every scrap of proof that Samantha and Jake had been carrying on behind my back. My lawyer, a sharp woman named Vanessa, flipped through the file with a grim expression. This is damning, she said finally, looking up at me. You've got more than enough to prove infidelity, which will work heavily in your favor during the divorce. But the financial aspect, the money she took from your joint account, that's even worse. If we can prove she used it to fund her affair, we can make a case for fraud. Fraud? I asked, raising an eyebrow. Vanessa nodded. It's not just about the cheating, John. If she diverted marital funds for personal gain, especially for something like this, you could sue her for damages. We could even push for criminal charges if the evidence is strong enough. I leaned back in my chair, letting her words sink in. Criminal charges. The thought of Samantha facing actual consequences for her actions was almost too good to be true. What about Jake? I asked. Can we go after him? Vanessa frowned. It's trickier with him. Unless he knowingly participated in the financial fraud or there's evidence of something illegal, he's just a third party. But don't worry, once this goes public, his life will be messy enough. That was enough for me. Samantha might have thought she was untouchable, but she was about to learn how wrong she was. Over the next few days, I played the part of the unsuspecting husband perfectly. I went to work, came home, made small talk with Samantha, all while setting the final pieces of my plan into motion. Mark had been a godsend, helping me track Samantha's movements and ensuring Jake stayed out of the picture. He'd even managed to dig up some dirt on Jake's personal life, nothing major, but enough to keep him scared and cooperative. The turning point came when Samantha told me she was going out with the girls one evening. I smiled and nodded, pretending not to notice the way she avoided my eyes. As soon as she left, I grabbed my phone and called Mark. She's on the move, I said. Are you ready? Ready and waiting, he replied. Mark had agreed to follow Samantha, armed with a camera and a location tracker. I didn't trust myself to confront her in the moment. I wasn't sure if I'd be able to keep my emotions in check. But Mark was calm, calculating, and unflinchingly loyal. He'd get the evidence I needed. It didn't take long for her to lead him straight to Jake. They met at a small bar on the outskirts of town, far enough away to avoid running into anyone who might recognize them. Mark snapped photos from his car as they laughed, flirted, and touched each other like a pair of teenagers. Then, just as I'd suspected, they left together and headed to a nearby motel. When Mark sent me the photos, my hands shook with a mixture of rage and satisfaction. There was no denying it now, no way for Samantha to weasel her way out of this. She'd been caught in the act, and I was going to make sure the whole world knew it. The next morning, I confronted her. She was in the kitchen again, sipping coffee and scrolling through her phone when I walked in. She barely glanced up as I entered the room. "Morning," she said casually. I didn't respond. Instead, I pulled out my phone, opened the photo album, and slid it across the counter toward her. "Care to explain this?" She frowned, picking up the phone. The moment her eyes landed on the photos, her expression shifted from confusion to panic. "What the hell is this?" she demanded, her voice rising. "You tell me," I said coldly. "You and Jake, at a bar, then at a motel. Does that jog your memory?" She set the phone down, her hands trembling. But instead of apologizing, she doubled down. "You had me followed," she spat, her eyes blazing with fury. "That's insane, John. You're insane. Don't turn this around on me," I snapped. "You're the one sneaking around, lying to my face, and stealing from me to fund your affair. Don't you dare act like the victim here." Her jaw tightened, and for a moment, she didn't say anything. Then, with a defiant glare, she said, "Fine. You want the truth?" "Yes, I've been seeing Jake. And you know what? I don't regret it. He makes me feel alive, something you haven't done in years." Her words cut deep, but I didn't let it show. "That's fine," I said calmly. "Because I've already filed for divorce. And trust me, Samantha, you're not getting a damn thing." Her eyes widened in shock. "You what?" "You heard me," I said, my voice icy. "I've got everything I need to make sure you walk away with nothing. So go ahead, pack your bags, and get out of my house. You and Jake can enjoy your new beginnings together." For the first time, I saw real fear in her eyes. She opened her mouth to argue, but no words came out. The queen of manipulation was finally out of moves. Samantha stood frozen, her mouth slightly open as though searching for some clever rebuttal. For the first time in years, she had nothing to say. The usual manipulative glint in her eye was replaced with fear, a deep, primal kind of fear that told me she realized just how thoroughly I had dismantled her game. "You filed for divorce," she finally managed to choke out. Her voice was shaky, the mask of control slipping entirely. "Yes," I said, my voice cold and even. "And not just divorce. I've got enough evidence to make sure you don't walk away with a single cent. I've spoken to a lawyer, Samantha. Adultery. Financial fraud. Do you even realize how deep you've buried yourself?" Her eyes darted around the room as if searching for an escape. "John, wait," she said, her tone suddenly shifting to something softer, almost pleading. "Let's talk about this. Please, just, give me a chance to explain." "Explain?" I laughed bitterly, the sound almost foreign to my own ears. "Explain what, exactly? That you've been sleeping with another man for over a year? That you lied to my face every single day while draining our account to fund your little romance? Or maybe you want to explain how you and my own mother conspired to keep it all hidden from me?" Her face paled at the mention of my mother. "John, it wasn't like that," she said quickly. "Your mom, she was just trying to protect you. She didn't want you to get hurt." "Hurt?" My voice rose, shaking with rage. The only thing that hurt was realizing my mother, a woman I've trusted my entire life, was helping you cheat on me. She knew what you were doing, and she chose to protect you instead of me. Don't you dare pin this on her." Tears began streaming down her face now, but I felt nothing. Not pity, not empathy, not regret. Only cold, hard resolve. "John, please," she whispered. "I made a mistake, okay? But we can fix this. We can go to therapy, work things out. No, I cut her off sharply. You don't get to pretend this is something we can fix. You didn't make a mistake, Samantha. You made a choice. Over and over again. Every time you lied to me. Every time you met Jake at some sleazy motel. Every time you looked me in the eye and pretended to be my wife. This isn't a mistake. It's who you are. She sobbed into her hands, but I didn't care. I wasn't about to let her manipulate me with crocodile tears. Not anymore. Here's how this is going to work, I said, stepping closer. You're going to pack your things and get out of my house. Today. I've already spoken to the bank and frozen our accounts, so don't bother trying to access any more money. You're done. She looked up at me, her eyes wide with disbelief. You can't just throw me out, John. This is my home, too. Not anymore, I said coldly. You forfeited that right the moment you decided to betray me. And trust me, Samantha, if you don't leave quietly, I'll make sure everyone knows exactly why. Her expression darkened, the fear giving way to anger. You're a bastard, you know that, she spat. You think you're better than me? You're pathetic, John. You always have been. That's why I needed someone like Jake in the first place. Her words were meant to sting, but they barely registered. I was beyond caring about her insults. Good, I said, my voice steady. Then you'll have no problem leaving. Because the sooner you're out of my life, the better. It didn't take long for her to start packing. I watched as she stormed through the house, throwing clothes and toiletries into a suitcase with a fury that matched her venomous words. She muttered curses under her breath, slamming drawers and doors as though trying to provoke a reaction from me. But I didn't give her the satisfaction. I just stood there, arms crossed, watching her dig her own grave. By the time she was done, the house felt lighter, quieter. She stood by the door with her suitcase in hand, glaring at me one last time. You're going to regret this, she said, her voice low and menacing. No, Samantha, I replied, meeting her gaze without flinching. The only thing I regret is not seeing who you really were sooner. With that, she was gone. The door slammed shut behind her, and for the first time in what felt like years, I could finally breathe. But it wasn't over. Not yet. I still had one loose end to tie up, Jake. While I was content to let Samantha self-destruct on her own, I wasn't about to let Jake walk away unscathed. He'd been a willing participant in her betrayal, and he needed to face the consequences. I reached out to Vanessa, my lawyer, and explained my plan. Together, we drafted a formal letter demanding restitution for the money Samantha had funneled into their affair. While we couldn't legally force Jake to pay, the letter made it clear that if he didn't cooperate, we'd take the matter public. His name, his reputation, and his career would all be dragged through the mud. Mark delivered the letter in person, ensuring that Jake understood the gravity of the situation. According to Mark, Jake looked like he'd seen a ghost when he read it. He's terrified, Mark said with a grin. I don't think he'll be a problem anymore. That was good enough for me. Jake might not have been worth my time, but making him squirm was a satisfying bonus. A week later, I filed the final paperwork for the divorce. Samantha didn't contest it, she knew she had no chance. I didn't just want her out of my life, I wanted to make sure she could never hurt me, financially or emotionally, again. The court sided with me on nearly every issue, granting me full ownership of the house and protecting my assets from her grasp. When it was all over, I stood in the empty living room, letting the silence wash over me. For the first time in months, I felt free. Samantha was gone, and with her, the lies and betrayal that had poisoned my life. I wasn't the same man I'd been when this all started, broken, naive, and trusting. I was stronger now. Wiser. And ready for whatever came next. The house was quieter than it had been in years. Samantha's absence wasn't just physical, it felt like a black cloud had lifted, leaving behind a strange calm. For days, I walked through the rooms, reclaiming the space as my own. Her perfume no longer lingered in the air, her scattered belongings were gone, and the suffocating weight of her lies had finally disappeared. But peace wasn't immediate. While Samantha was gone, the fallout of her betrayal remained. Friends started calling, some out of concern, others out of thinly veiled curiosity. It was only a matter of time before the truth started spreading. I didn't try to stop it. Let them talk. Samantha had built her image as the perfect wife, the flawless woman. If the truth tore that image apart, so be it. She deserved every ounce of scrutiny coming her way. And then there was my mother. I hadn't spoken to her since the day I confronted her about her involvement in Samantha's affair. She called and texted several times in the days that followed, leaving voicemails that ranged from tearful apologies to defensive explanations. "John, please call me back," she pleaded in one message. "I know I made a mistake, but I was only trying to protect you." Another voicemail came hours later, her tone sharper, more desperate. "Do you even care about what I've been going through? Samantha manipulated me, too, you know." I didn't know what to do. I deleted every message without responding. Her betrayal had cut deeper than Samantha's. I could understand, in some twisted way, why Samantha had done what she did. She was selfish, ungrateful, and deceitful, traits I'd been blind to for years. But my mother? She was supposed to be my anchor, my protector. Instead, she had chosen Samantha's lies over my trust. But as the days turned into weeks, my anger softened. Not forgiveness, no, I wasn't ready for that, but a reluctant understanding. Samantha had manipulated her, just as she'd manipulated me. My mother wasn't innocent, but she wasn't the monster I'd made her out to be in my mind. I decided to meet her halfway, not to reconcile, but to give her the chance to explain. When I arrived at her house, she greeted me at the door, her face etched with worry. She looked older, more fragile, like the guilt had weighed on her these past few weeks. "John," she said softly. "Thank you for coming." I didn't respond, walking past her into the living room. She followed, her hands wringing nervously. "I know I can't undo what I've done," she began, her voice trembling. "But I need you to know that I never wanted to hurt you." I turned to face her, my expression unreadable. "Then why did you?" I asked. "Why did you choose her over me?" She sank into the couch, her shoulders slumping. "She came to me months ago," she said. "Crying, telling me you two were having problems. She said she felt alone, that you didn't love her anymore." I believed her, John. I thought if I helped her, I was helping you, too. "Helping me?" I scoffed. "By covering for her? By letting her lie and cheat while pretending everything was fine?" "I didn't know how far it had gone," she said quickly. "By the time I realized the truth, I didn't know what to do. She threatened to tell you that I'd been helping her from the start. I was scared, John. Scared of losing you." Her voice cracked, and for the first time, I saw the guilt in her eyes. It wasn't an excuse, and it didn't absolve her, but it was clear she had suffered for her choices. "I don't know if I can forgive you," I said after a long pause. "What you did, it broke something in me. But I also can't keep carrying this anger. It's exhausting." Tears streamed down her face, and she nodded. "I'll spend the rest of my life trying to earn back your trust, John. I promise you that." I stood up, my chest tight. "I need time," I said simply. "Don't call me. I'll reach out when I'm ready." She didn't argue, just nodded again as I walked out the door. The fallout wasn't just emotional. Samantha's departure left behind practical consequences, too. The divorce proceedings were swift but grueling. Samantha didn't contest the evidence I had gathered, but that didn't stop her from trying to scrape together whatever leverage she could. Vanessa, my lawyer, was a fortress of calm and competence, shutting down every weak argument Samantha's attorney tried to make. In the end, I got what I wanted. Full ownership of the house. Protection of my assets. Samantha walked away with nothing but her suitcase and the humiliation of being exposed. Jake, predictably, disappeared from her life shortly after the divorce was finalized. According to Mark, who'd kept tabs on the situation, Jake had moved on to another woman, leaving Samantha to pick up the pieces alone. It was poetic justice. Despite the small victories, there was still a void. The life I had built, the life I thought was real, was gone. I found myself lying awake at night, staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment of my marriage and wondering how I'd missed the warning signs. How had I been so blind? So trusting? Mark, ever the loyal friend, dragged me out of the house one evening for drinks. "You've been holed up for weeks," he said as we sat at the bar. "It's time to move on, man. Samantha's gone. Jake's gone. You've won." "Have I?" I asked, swirling my drink. "Because it doesn't feel like it." Mark clapped me on the shoulder. "You have. Trust me, John. You've survived the worst of it. Now it's time to start living again." His words stayed with me long after the night ended. Maybe he was right. Maybe it was time to stop dwelling on what I'd lost and start focusing on what came next. That night, I sat down with a pen and paper, writing out everything I wanted from my new life. No more lies. No more betrayal. No more wasting time on people who didn't deserve me. It wasn't much, but it was a start. The finality of everything hit me as I sat in my now empty home. It was mine again, not just the house, but my life. The toxic cloud of betrayal, manipulation, and lies had cleared, leaving behind a strange, raw silence. I had won, yes, but the cost of that victory was immense. Samantha was gone. My relationship with my mother was fractured, perhaps beyond repair. Even with all that had happened, the question remained, what now? That night, I poured myself a drink and walked into the backyard. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of autumn leaves. I sat on the patio, looking up at the stars, and for the first time in months, I let myself feel everything, the anger, the sadness, the relief. It was cathartic, in a way, acknowledging that while I'd been broken, I wasn't destroyed. I was still here. And that counted for something. The next morning, I decided to start fresh. The first step was to purge the house of everything that reminded me of Samantha. Her clothes were already gone, but her presence lingered in smaller, more insidious ways: photos on the wall, the mug she always used, the throw blanket she loved. I gathered it all into boxes and set them by the curb, feeling lighter with every trip. By midday, the house felt different. It wasn't just empty, it was mine. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe. I spent the rest of the day cleaning, organizing, and rearranging. The old photos came down, replaced with new ones of places I wanted to visit, hobbies I wanted to pick up again. I even pulled out my guitar, which had been gathering dust in the corner for years. It felt good, strumming the strings, letting the music fill the space where Samantha's presence used to be. A week later, I got a call from my mother. I debated letting it go to voicemail but decided to answer. Her voice was tentative, cautious. "John," she said softly. "I know you said you needed time, but I wanted to check in. See how you're doing." I sighed, leaning back against the kitchen counter. "I'm doing better," I said honestly. "The divorce is finalized, the house is mine, and I've started moving on." "That's good," she said, her relief palpable. "I'm glad you're finding some peace." There was a pause, heavy and awkward. Then she added, "I know I've hurt you, and I'll never stop regretting that. But I'm still your mother, John. I love you, and I hope one day you can forgive me." "I don't know if I can," I admitted. "But I'm willing to try. That's the best I can offer right now." It wasn't the reconciliation she was hoping for, but it was a step forward. She thanked me, her voice trembling with emotion, and we ended the call on a cautious but hopeful note. Life slowly started to take shape again. Mark dragged me out of the house more often, insisting that I needed to rejoin the living. At first, I resisted, but eventually, I realized he was right. Staying cooped up in my own head wasn't helping me heal. One night, we went to a new bar downtown. It was packed, the energy electric. For the first time in months, I felt a flicker of something I hadn't felt in a long time: excitement. Mark, ever the social butterfly, introduced me to a group of his friends, and I spent the evening laughing, talking, and, for a few hours, forgetting about everything that had happened. That's when I met her. Her name was Emma, and she was nothing like Samantha. Where Samantha was cold and calculating, Emma was warm and genuine. She had this way of talking to people that made you feel like you were the only person in the room. We hit it off immediately, bonding over a shared love of music and a mutual distaste for karaoke. I didn't tell her about my past that night. I wasn't ready to open up that wound again. But something about her made me feel hopeful, like maybe, just maybe, I could find happiness again. Over the next few months, Emma and I grew closer. She was patient, never pushing me to share more than I was comfortable with, but also encouraging me to let go of the bitterness I was holding on to. With her help, I started to see that Samantha's betrayal didn't define me. It was a chapter in my life, painful and devastating, yes, but just one chapter in a much larger story. I also started repairing my relationship with my mother. It wasn't easy, and there were days when the resentment threatened to overwhelm me. But slowly, we began to rebuild the trust that had been shattered. It would take time, but I was willing to try. For all her faults, she was still my mother, and I didn't want to carry that anger with me forever. The final piece of closure came one rainy afternoon when I received an unexpected email. It was from Jake. "John. I know I'm the last person you want to hear from, but I need to say this. I'm sorry for everything. I didn't know how much damage I was causing until it was too late. Samantha lied to me, too, and I let myself believe her because it was easier than facing the truth. I hope you can find peace. You deserve it." I stared at the screen for a long time, debating whether to respond. In the end, I didn't. His apology was meaningless to me. But the fact that he'd sent it, that he'd acknowledged the destruction he'd helped cause, was enough. It was closure, and I didn't need anything more. Months later, as I sat on the beach with Emma, watching the waves crash against the shore, I realized how far I'd come. The man who had been shattered by betrayal was gone. In his place was someone stronger, someone who had learned to let go of the past and embrace the present. Life had given me a second chance, and this time, I wasn't going to waste it.